This is a podcast from Seven Vineyard.
Great to see you, great to be with you. For those of you who haven't met me before, my name's Dan. I'm married to Karen, and we have 3 kids, Jasmine, Layla, and Noah. It's great to see a few England shirts out there today. Hope you are all as excited as I am about tonight's final. I hope you're as optimistic as I am. I just have a feeling. I think this is our year. I know you've heard it before, but this year is different. I also hope you enjoyed the semi-final as much as I did. And that goal by Ollie Watkins, as an Aston Villa fan, it had extra joy about it. And I'm still kind of living off the buzz. So yeah, let's hope this evening is really special. But this morning, I want to speak to you about the life of Peter. Owen has been doing a series on the book of Acts about this Jewish revolution that took place after the life of Jesus. And one of the key figures that he's mentioned several times and have come up in lots of the stories is Peter. So we've seen him speaking at Pentecost to crowds of people. We've seen him having this weird experience on a rooftop and entering into a kind of trance and receiving a vision from God that became really key in understanding what the message that they had was and who it was for. We've seen him playing a role in taking the gospel or the good news to the Gentiles, to the people who were not Jewish. We've seen him having disputes and conflicts with Paul about their Jewish heritage and traditions. And it's kind of made me curious to go back and look at his life a little bit and think about what happened to this man to turn him into this character who played such a key role in the revolution. So that's what I want to do today. I want us to kind of travel back in time from Acts, just following the journey of Peter. We'll do a whistle-stop tour of some of the key events that happened in his life, a bit like one of those films that looks at the backstory to a main character. So we've been looking at him in Acts, and we're going to look at what happened to him in the gospel accounts. As we do that, I'm going to try and share some of the things that I've felt God speaking to me about as I've looked at his life. And the main thing that I find so intriguing and so endearing about this person, Peter, and which I've been really challenged by as I look at him, is his constant desire to be close to Jesus. His constant and often impulsive need to be with Jesus. He's someone who will do whatever it takes. He's someone who will jump at the chance, like literally jump at the chance, and sometimes even into water. He is quite a character. And that's the question that I feel God has been raising for me, and perhaps he would raise for us today, is the question of, do you still want to be close to me? Do you still want to follow me? And I know that is in some ways a very simple question, and it should have a very simple answer, but I think the reality is it's not always that straightforward. So we'll come on to that. But first, a quick introduction to the person of Peter, if you don't know him. His real name is Simon. Peter is a name that Jesus gives to him a little bit later in the story. So in my talk today, I'll be referring to Simon, I'll be referring to Peter, and they're the same person, okay? Sometimes the Gospels refer to him as Simon Peter to try and make it simpler. But he was a Jewish fisherman at the time of Jesus. He was born in Bethsaida in Galilee, in the north of Israel. But he actually lived in Capernaum, which is a town on the shore of Lake Galilee. It's a town that you can still go and visit today. We know almost nothing about his life before he met Jesus, but we do know that he was the son of Jonah or Jonas, that he had a brother called Andrew, and we think that he was most likely married. His personality, as described in the Gospels, is one of the things that make him really interesting. And he is thoroughly human. He makes tons of mistakes. So it's quite easy to kind of relate to him and empathize with him. But I honestly think he would have driven me nuts if I had known him or been anywhere near him. Because personality-wise, I think he's the polar opposite of me. For those of you who know me, I try to think before I speak. I kind of need to do that. I'm quite careful in what I say. I tend to avoid conflict. My friends probably wish that I would just loosen up a bit, just be a bit more impulsive. And actually, one of my titles for the talk today was How to Be More Impulsive, Lessons from the Life of Peter. For those of you who are into personality tests, I'm a 9 on the Enneagram. I'm a green on the colors test. I'm a ISFJ in Myers-Briggs. My main strengths in StrengthsFinder are connection and harmony. Some of you, that means absolutely nothing to you. Those of you who also enjoy personality tests feel like you know me a lot better. And for those of you who know personality tests and hate them, you're thinking, Dan, don't put yourself in a box, right? But Peter is different. Peter is quite impulsive. He causes chaos and sometimes conflict. He has this habit of talking nonsense at inopportune moments. You'll find him pledging his undying allegiance to Jesus in one moment, and then in the next, denying that he's ever met the man or knows anything about him. At one point, he has a go at Jesus. He kind of thinks that what Jesus is talking about is confusing people. He's talking about his upcoming death, and Peter thinks it's not a good idea, so he has a bit of a go. At one special moment called the Transfiguration, where this kind of miraculous or mystical experience where Jesus appears with Elijah and Moses, Peter just kind of blurts the first thing that comes into his mind, I think. And he says, it's good that we're here. We could build some shelters. And it's just almost so jarring and bizarre that two of the gospel writers, Mark and Luke, almost make excuses for him and say, everyone was very tired, or everyone was really scared. But this is kind of what he comes out with. He's also got quite a temper on him. He can act quite rashly. At one point, he pulls out his sword when Jesus has been arrested, and he has a swing, and he cuts off the ear of the high priest's servant. So much for the non-violent revolution that Jesus was leading. Peter almost hijacked that. So life with him is never dull. It's a complete roller coaster, but when you add up all of the events, in the Gospels and then as Owen has described to us in Acts, this man had an absolutely incredible life. So let's look at a few of the key moments in his life together briefly. And the first one is when he meets Jesus on the shore of the lake and his life changes forever. The verses will come up on the screen, but you can also follow along on your phones. Feel free to have your phones out, jump around between the different passages, check whether what I'm saying lines up with what you think. But Matthew chapter 4 says, as Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, called Peter, and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come, follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. At once they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. So Jesus says, come follow me, and Peter leaves his nets and follows. And from this account in Matthew, we might assume that Jesus was a complete stranger, that he was completely unknown to Peter, that this was a kind of rash, irrational decision to follow a stranger, like he had some kind of magnetic power or aura, that they just saw him and he said this sentence and they dropped everything and followed him like robots. But the other accounts in the Gospels tell us a lot more. There was probably a lot more going on. In Luke's Gospel, it says that Jesus had been in the area, he had been healing many people. He had even included Simon's mother-in-law in those healings. He had healed her from a fever. Not only that, but a fishing miracle had just taken place where Jesus had advised these men to put their nets on the other side of the boat. They'd had a tough night, they hadn't caught anything, and Jesus comes along, he's a untrained fisherman, and he's telling the professionals how to do their jobs, which they do, and then this miraculous catch of fish takes place. So that might have had something to do with Peter's decision to drop his nets and follow. But there are other factors as well. So Peter's brother Andrew, we know from John's account, had been a follower of John the Baptist. And John the Baptist was someone who was widely regarded as a prophet. He was highly respected and followed. And Andrew had been one of his followers or disciples. So he would have known that when Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist, John referred to him as the Lamb of God, and he said that he was not worthy even to untie his sandals. Andrew then went and reported that to Peter and said that he had found the Messiah. So again, there's a lot in the decision to drop the nets and follow. There's one other thing as well that I hadn't really realized before looking into this, which is to understand a little bit about the education system and what Peter's background was. Because we know from Acts, in Acts chapter 4, that these were unschooled and ordinary men. That's how Peter and the other followers are referred to, unschooled and ordinary men. Unschooled, what does that mean? All Jewish boys at the time, from about the age of 5, would have gone to kind of their equivalent of elementary school, which was called Beit Sefer, which means the house of the book. And the curriculum was the Torah, the first 5 books of the scriptures. And they would have been learning and memorizing these scriptures. And by the age of about 12 or 13, they would have had them down. They would have all pretty much been able to recite the first 5 books of the scriptures by 12 or 13 years old. At that point, the vast majority of them left school, went home, and picked up the family trade. But the best students, they were encouraged or allowed to continue to Beit Midrash, which is the house of learning, and they would continue their education in the Torah up to about the age of 17, by which point they would have memorized, by heart, the whole of what we now know as the Old Testament. Okay? So they would have had that all stored away, which is absolutely incredible. But at that point, almost all of them would have then gone back home, and apparently they were encouraged to, let me find the quote here, go make babies, pray that they become rabbis, and ply your trade. So a rabbi was a teacher, a religious speaker, and the best of the best students, so those who made it from the first kind of school into the second and then wanted to continue, I guess almost like postgraduate studies, they had the option to follow a rabbi. And there would be probably a kind of grilling or testing of how well they knew the scriptures, what their opinions were on different perspectives on them. And only those people became apprentices or followers of a rabbi. So when Jesus walks by the shore of Lake Galilee and says to Peter, who was an unschooled and ordinary man, in other words, he probably did those first few years of Torah learning and then left. When a rabbi, Jesus, came and invited him to become a follower or an apprentice, it was a bit like a university professor from a top university, let's say Oxford, walking into McDonald's and saying to somebody serving food who doesn't have any academic qualifications, I want you to come and do an internship with me, all expenses paid at Oxford. It's a little bit like that, okay? Not an exact equivalent, but there was a sense in which this was a golden opportunity. A rabbi had asked them to follow him. And so here's my first kind of thought or point from the life of Peter, that before Peter believed in Jesus, Jesus believed in Peter. It was Jesus who came and chose him. Jesus who came and invited him to follow. And what about us? What if the same is true for us? What if this summer, in this kind of summer season, Owen's described how we're going to be going into a different rhythm. We're not going to be meeting here, but we'll be meeting in different ways. Many of us will be taking a break at some point. What if Jesus is inviting us, maybe for the first time or for the 95th time, to follow him, to be his apprentice? I wonder where he's leading you at the moment. What do you sense? Are there new possibilities? Are there new opportunities? Are there new thoughts and ideas? Or even new theology, new views about God? And what about for us as a community, as Seven? Where is God leading us? Because it's not just a one-off thing in the past, but maybe a repeated invitation and call. So where is he leading us as Seven? And I think our invitation that we may sense from God won't look the same as Peter's. Unfortunately, we're unlikely to see a physical Jesus in front of us and hear his audible voice saying, Dan, come follow me this way. It will be more subtle than that. And I think from time to time, we may sense in our spirit, in our heart, that God is drawing us, inviting us, speaking to us about something. I had an experience recently like this. I was in the Brecon Beacons with my son Noah. We went on a camping trip together for a weekend. We were driving along in the car, and we had some music playing. We were actually listening to a song about the story of the prodigal son, where Jesus told this story about how God was like a father who runs towards us. It's a fantastic song called Running. Go and listen to it in your own time. But the lyrics say, while I was still far away, you came with amazing grace. Regardless of past mistakes, you came running, Lord. And as I listened to that, I welled up. I was so moved by that thought again of God's love and acceptance for me. It took me by complete surprise. We were on a trip. I was driving. I had to be careful because I was crying. I was kind of trying to hide it from Noah because, we were on a lads trip together. This wasn't what was meant to happen. But in that moment, I just felt God again just inviting me. And a bit like Jesus coming to Peter and saying, follow me. Just feeling that sense in a way, very ordinary moment of Jesus saying, Dan, do you still want to follow me? And then, just in my heart and in my spirit, making a simple choice to say yes to that again. So what if it's not a one-off decision we made in the past? What it's a regular, repeated invitation in small and ordinary ways to follow Jesus? And what if you're not sure whether it is Jesus or who Jesus is or what he's inviting you to? Well, Peter said yes, and he dropped everything. And then that became a consistent behavior, which we'll look at together now briefly, where he just kind of repeatedly and instinctively was moving towards Jesus, was pulling towards Jesus, was saying yes to him. So one of my favorite examples of this, you may be familiar with the story from Matthew chapter 14, is where he steps out of a boat onto water and has this unbelievable experience, briefly, of walking on water. Let's read it together. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from the land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. Then Peter got out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. And let's not miss that. I mean, this story is full of miracles, things that are unbelievable if it's not, for God making them happen. But Peter, stepping out of the boat and walking on the water, is perhaps the biggest of them. And I don't have an explanation of why he got out, why he said to Jesus, if it's you, tell me to come to you. I mean, surely the normal thing would have been to say, Jesus, if that's you, I mean, I'm freaked out right now, but if that's you, come over here and make yourself clear. Or come over here and get in the boat with us. What are you doing out there? But instead he says this crazy thing. If it's you, tell me to come to you on the water. And as I've just been reflecting on that, the sense that I've had for us is that in those moments where we're not sure where God is, where we're not sure whether it's Jesus, whether we're not sure what he's saying to us, that we need to ask him to speak. Lord, if it's you, please speak to me. Lord, if it's you, please show me. And I had this sense that around some of the thinking and conversations we've been doing as a community, that this could be the case for some of us. Owen's been leading the series on Acts, Claire's been leading a series on what is God like. Fantastic topics, and I'm sure they wouldn't mind me saying they've been asking some big questions. And there may be elements where we're on this journey, as a community of examining what we think, what we believe. We've looked at topics like heaven and hell. What did Jesus do on the cross? Sex and sexuality. And I think it's normal and okay to be a little bit unsettled when we have this experience of saying, God, is that you? I'm looking out into the storm and I'm trying to work out, is that you and is that where you're leading me? And so that was the encouragement that I took from this story as I looked at it, is that we can be asking that same question as Peter this summer, maybe this summer season, maybe when you're on a break. England will be the European champions by then. But use that time to be examining and asking God, Lord, if it's you, just help me to believe, help me to understand. The final thing that I want to pull out from Peter's life is that if life feels a bit bumpy, you can take comfort from the fact that Peter's life was literally like a roller coaster, but that Jesus showed up in amazing ways at key times when he needed it. So let me just fast forward through a few of the later chapters in the story and highlight some real highs and some real lows. So real high, Matthew chapter 16. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But what about you?" he asked. "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it." So Peter makes this statement about Jesus, that he is the Christ. Owen's been explaining to us in recent weeks, Christ was the Greek word for Messiah, the Hebrew word for anointed one or king. So there was this kind of politically charged statement or testimony that came from Peter, and in response, Jesus affirms him and gives him a new name. Remember, his name had been Simon. Jesus says, your name is Peter. Really, it comes from the Greek word Petra, but really, Jesus would have said it in Aramaic, okay, which was the language that Jesus spoke, which was Cephas. But it's this statement of affirmation and a new beginning and a new start and a new status. So that was a real high moment, followed not long after by a real low moment, okay? Jesus has been arrested and led away. Peter has chosen to follow at a distance to kind of see what happens to Jesus as he's being tortured and questioned. Matthew chapter 26, verse 69 finds Peter sitting out in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him and says, "You also were with Jesus of Galilee," she said. But he denied it before them all. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. Then he went out to the gateway, where another servant girl saw him and said to the people there, "This fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth." He denied it again with an oath, "I don't know the man." After a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, "Surely you are one of them. Your accent gives you away." Then he began to call down curses, and he swore to them, "I don't know the man." Immediately a rooster crowed. Then Peter remembered the words that Jesus had spoken, "Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times." So this was something that Jesus had predicted would happen, that Peter would deny that he knew him. And Peter had strenuously argued against that and said, "I will never deny or leave you, even if I have to lose my life." So imagine the depth of this low. Matthew says he went outside and wept bitterly. Luke's gospel says, includes a moment where Jesus looks across the courtyard and looks directly at him as the rooster crows. So an absolute low. He must have felt an intense feeling of shame. But the good news is that's not where the story ends. Fast forward to John chapter 20. Jesus has died, and some of the women have brought back this report that he might not be so dead anymore. So Peter and another disciple, who's named in John's gospel as the other disciple, he's widely believed to be John, run together to the tomb to see what's happened. And it includes the detail that the other disciple outran Jesus, which I think is a lovely detail. If it is the author, just kind of saying, I won the sprint. But when he gets there, he doesn't go in. He looks inside the tomb, but he waits. Whereas Peter, by now you know him well, what do you think he does? He gets there and he runs straight into the tomb. He is so longing for hope. He is so in need to know what has happened to Jesus and where he is. And he has that same kind of impulse. And this kind of culminates in their recognition that Jesus had, in fact, come back from the dead. And John chapter 1, the final passage that I want us just to look at together, this is one of the times where the disciples encounter Jesus after his resurrection. They're in a boat again, and they see Jesus on the shore. The boat is heading to the shore, but what does Peter do? Of course, he does the completely logical thing and jumps in. Not only that, he puts his coat on first before he jumps into the water. I'd like an explanation if anyone can give it to me. It's that same impulsive desire to be near Jesus. He just can't wait. And then comes this hugely important moment in Peter's story and in understanding how he came to be the person that we've seen in Acts. So let's read together John chapter 21, verse 15. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my sheep. I don't have time to go into exactly what was going on there and what Jesus meant by feed my sheep and feed my lambs, but listen to what he says next. Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you're old, Peter, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said, follow me. And I love that echo of Jesus inviting him again to choose to follow, that echo with his initial call. And there are echoes as well in the 3 times that Jesus asks him if he loves him, which is a clear link to the 3 times that Peter has denied him. Each time is a measure of restoration, of bringing him back into a place of acceptance, of healed relationship. But Jesus is also preparing him for the challenge ahead, which we've seen in Acts. He gives him a hint of the kind of death that he would eventually die. Christian tradition says that Peter was crucified upside down. We don't know for sure if that's true. But Jesus had warned him about the direction of travel. And that is something that Peter would have been very aware of when he stood up at Pentecost and said to the crowd, God has made this Jesus, who you crucified, both Lord and Messiah. He would have known the risk of that statement. But something had happened to him that had turned him from this humbled figure after denying Jesus to someone who had that courage, who had that conviction, that bravery to spread that dangerous message, one that would eventually get him killed. And I want to suggest that it was perhaps a combination of 3 things. You know, the first thing was seeing a man who had come back from the dead. That just doesn't happen, and it would have an absolutely massive impact. The second thing, though, was that man showing unbelievable grace and acceptance of Peter. And the third thing was being filled with the Spirit at Pentecost, which we read about in Acts. We don't know the exact balance. We can't say Peter was able to act like this because of 30% number 1, 20% number 2, etc. The first one is probably not available to us, which is seeing physically a man who has come back from the dead, unless we have a big surprise. But the second and the third are definitely available to us today and now as we finish. And they are receiving unbelievable grace and acceptance from this person called Jesus and being filled with the Holy Spirit like they were on the day of Pentecost. Those are available to us today and every day in this summer season. So as we finish, I want to ask Juliet and Becky if they'll come back up. I've asked them just to sing a song, and we'll have a few minutes of reflection. I've asked them to sing an old song called Jesus Be the Center, because for me, it just communicates that attitude and that desire to be close to Jesus that we've seen in the life of Peter. It says, Jesus, be the center, be the fire in my heart, be the wind in my sails, literally be the source of our love and our joy. And I invite you just to stay seated and just to listen as they play this and sing this over us, and to think about the questions that are hopefully going to come up on the screen, which are just questions to prompt some thought and some reflection. They're all questions that I've asked as I've shared now about the life of Peter. But they're these. What is Jesus inviting you into at the moment? How strong is your desire to say yes and to follow him? Like Peter, we saw that repeated, impulsive desire to be close to Jesus again. And there's no judgment if you don't feel that desire or that conviction or that clarity. It's just a chance to get in touch with where we're at in this moment. The third one is, where are we asking, Lord, if it's you? Lord, if you're saying this, Lord, or if you're opening this door, or Lord, if you're inviting me to change my thinking on something, then please speak. And where do we need to experience that acceptance and that affirmation, like Peter did after his denial, of being restored into relationship with God?